I'm Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Thank you for listening to Your Working Life, my podcast series featuring thought leaders in the career and personal growth arena. You spend a significant portion of your life at work, so I'm on a mission to provide you with tools, inspiration, and resources so you can enjoy your career and love your life. And I am delighted to welcome my very special guest to the show today. Hemma Prafullchandra is with me. Hemma, welcome.
Thank you, Caroline.
Hemma, I want to tell our listening audience a little bit about you because you have such an extraordinary background. You are currently the CTO and EVP of products at High Trust, and you are responsible for High Trust strategy and its security and compliance innovations. And you're really an evangelist for what's possible because you drive the company and the ecosystem, including partners, industry bodies, and customers, to enable cost-effective, secure deployment of virtualization and cloud. And you bring over 26 years of industry experience in the field of security with expertise in virtualization, cloud, operating systems, Java 2, firewall, PKI, secure email, web services, a myriad of other things. And I am so excited to dive into your passion today, which is cybersecurity. And how about let's start off by talking about why it's important for women to pursue technical education and careers. But if you could take me back to how you became interested in this field and discovered that cybersecurity is your passion.
Certainly. So I grew up in England,
Uh-huh.
and one of the opportunities I had was they allowed me to spend 1 week at Imperial College and get exposure to all the sciences available. So essentially, you, as a student, high school student, were able to go to a university, spend a week, and get exposure to all the engineering and sciences, from classical physics, biology, to things like civil engineering, mechanical engineering. And what I realized during that week was most of those engineering topics were not of interest. But something that was just emerging at that time, it was in a mainstream curriculum, was computer science. And
Uh-huh.
so I opted for computer science. I'm like, okay, this is different enough, emerging new. And I felt that it could be something that could interest me long term. And then in terms of actual cybersecurity, that was an accident. So
An accident. Let's hear
that
about
was
it.
yeah. So I was working for Sun Microsystems and working on OSI, so the networking technology stacks.
Hmm.
And at that time, OSI was very popular in Europe, but not so much in the US. We had the internet stack, and so a different set of protocols and technologies. And so the work, the actual project, moved to France. So, Sun decided it made more sense to have engineers as well as the sales staff be local to where there was demand. And so I had an option of leaving Sun and, joining some other firm that was doing similar technologies, or staying with Sun. And at that time, when I looked around at what were some of the opportunities, I started working on operating system and the security aspects related to the operating system.
And that's where it started?
That's where it started, and have been working sort of in the security field ever since. Very long
Wow.
journey.
And you have been recognized as one of the power players in IT security, specifically in the year 2014, which is quite a global honor.
Yes. So
That's
this,
exciting.
yeah, that is exciting, and I think so unexpected, honored to have been nominated and recognized. I think the lesson there is, once you find something you're passionate about, the rewards come. They may not be immediate, but the rewards come eventually.
Well,
So
and that's such a good lesson, Hema, and I'd love to unpack that a little bit more because you are a beautiful, rare individual in that you are an executive level woman in technology, and I'm pleased that we're moving the needle A little bit, inviting more young girls and women to study technical education and pursue careers. We're moving the needle with STEM, but what I believe is that we need more women at the executive level like you to be role models. So were there barriers that you had to overcome to get to this executive level in technology?
So I think, for women, what I find, especially, now that I've been managing for several years and I have managed both men and women, that women tend to always present themselves with their capabilities as they are now.
Hmm.
Meaning they don't ever sort of present the potential of what they can be. They're sort of, and I don't know whether this is sort of lack of confidence or uncertainty about what the job could entail. But most of the conversations will start with, well, this is what I've done.
Yeah.
And so the natural tendency is that is what I can do, as opposed to actually thinking ahead and saying, I've been able to grow fairly naturally, right? So I would ask the women to think about why they feel they may not be able to do something. Actually question themselves with that and not position themselves sort of in a weaker role or a weaker position in terms of their capabilities.
That's such sage advice because I think quite often whether one is looking to advance or grow their career within a certain company or beyond, you're right, we focus on what we've done and what we're doing, but we don't think about that future component, which as you said is potential. And so many recruiters and search organizations are really hiring for potential. So we need to focus on that as well. That is great wisdom. Thank you for that. So let's look big picture, Hemma. What can society do to encourage women to pursue technical studies, degrees, and certainly careers? Because, as I said, we're getting there slowly but surely, but I think we can do more.
I think it's around exposure, right? As I shared just my personal journey, without that exposure to, women or women in science week, I would have never actually understood what the different sciences and engineering careers could be, and actually sort of decide that most of them weren't suitable for me and this is what I wanted to do. I think for a lot of women and girls specifically, they may not have that exposure. And in the high schools, I think more and more now computer science or at least some exposure to computing is becoming a norm because we're all exposed. I don't think there is a job today that does not involve some amount of digital. And so, making sure as parents and then as a society that we enable our daughters and nieces and just women in general exposure and invite them so that they can actually see the uh, jobs or activities in action. That's the best way. So, like this year, for example, at High Trust, we have 6 interns, of which I'm glad to say 3 are women. And
Great.
so, we're sort of trying to give the exposure so that they can understand firsthand what it is like to work in a startup, to actually have technical roles, and just kind of share. And one of the things I did, because most of these interns were engineering,
Hmm.
was invite the other functions, so invite the other executives to actually do a lunch and learn. So present to the interns what it's like to, for example, run GNA, to be a CEO or to be the CFO or head of marketing, because again, it's all about exposure. I'm on the technical side, but in my firm, there's a lot of jobs. We're all about cybersecurity. But for example, the business development function is very different from the activities I do and my responsibilities are.
I think that that's so important. I often think of students just entering university, and some have very specific ideas about want to study, and that changes when they're exposed to other things. So, equally in the job world, we have to kind of vision and think about what the possibilities are when we're recruiting new talent, so they can use their imaginations to consider options that they didn't even know were there.
Right. And I think around just recruiting and hiring, one of the things we've done is recognize that, each individual interviews slightly differently.
Mm,
And that, personally, for example, I'm soft spoken. And that does not mean that I don't have ambition or I'm not passionate. But so just because a person might be soft spoken or, nervous and sort of comes across slightly introvert doesn't mean that they don't have the potential. It's the person's job that's interviewing to try and tease out,
yes.
the actual sort of character of the individual, and allow for that. And I think the other thing we've done at Hydrus that I think, I would recommend to everyone is that once you have, it's sort of the domino effect or the flywheel, but essentially once you start having a few women, you will naturally be able to hire more. So on the exec staff, we have two. So, and then in terms of engineering roles, we have a lot of women. And what has happened is that you end up having a sort of a focus, and women sort of, if I was to contrast, for example, they'll have lunch together at work and they'll usually bring packed lunch because they don't have the cycles to run around.
Hmm.
Or they will, most of them, depending on their age, will have a hard stop around 5 because they have to go pick up the children.
Yeah.
And so accommodating for that, right, allowing them, make sure no meetings are scheduled in the evenings, but then they can always come online after they've put the children to bed.
Hmm.
So I think flexible time and hours allow for more women to participate in roles, allowing women to work from home, makes it possible.
Hemma, let's talk about mentorship and if you have experienced mentors or sponsors throughout your career and how that impacted your career growth.
So I've had mentors, and I will say that my biggest mentor is my spouse.
Very nice.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously you get the man's perspective straight away.
Hmm.
But he has been very helpful in terms of making me think through. So it's always like, you have to find somebody you can trust, know, and somebody who knows you well enough to be able to give you guidance. Because sometimes you just need a person to talk through. You have all the answers in you, but you haven't, pulled them out. And until you talk through what it is you're trying to do, or if you're dealing with a conflict or a difficult issue, having somebody that you can trust that knows you will allow you to have that conversation. But then I think having somebody that is lived the similar career, can also give you a perspective in terms of how they would do it differently. So outside of, my hobby, I have had a lot of mentors in terms of, all the previous managers. I stay in touch with them, and they have guided me. And I think the big thing to remember is you shouldn't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, uh, you will find mentors in the most unlikely, places. But if you don't ask, you won't know. And guidance is critical. In our space, especially cybersecurity, is changing. I mean, if you just look at us, just generally our life, and the digital impact. Everybody carries a phone. There's, all the social media. There's YouTube, like this podcast, right?
Yes,
You,
yes.
we're not having to do it face to face. So there is a lot of good information available online. That's your own homework. You have to do it. But then speaking to as many people to get perspectives is very critical.
I'm so glad that you talked about the giving the listeners permission to ask for help because I think the most successful people and certainly leaders have learned it's okay to ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a great strength to say, I can benefit from someone else's wisdom or expertise. So I appreciate that. And I want to toggle into this concept of leadership. You know, again, you are a powerful woman in an executive role and certainly a subject matter expert on cybersecurity. But how did you refine and how do you continue to develop your leadership skills?
It's I want to say that every day you learn, so you have to be open to learning,
Okay.
and you have to remember that it's all about people, right? Leadership is more about people than it is technology or knowing um, uh, whether an answer is correct or not, because it's about managing people for success. And it could be, and it's not just your staff, right? It's partners, the ecosystem. You have to understand the individual and what drives or motivates the individual.
Yeah.
So if you're, for example, like I do a lot of industry standards work, and there have been times where there's like 100 people in the room all fighting for what they think is best for us as a whole. But it might be impossible to implement, right? Technology wise, it might be not feasible at all. But you have to kind of walk through that. And I think in terms of that leadership skill, it's about the ability to listen, understand the individual, understand what motivates them, and then trying to find the best compromise that is, uh, good for you, but also good for them.
Beautifully put. And I so appreciate the active listening because I think that is an art and a skill and essential to success of leaders. So thank you for that. Hemma, you spoke so beautifully about the interview process, right? And how a good interviewer will tease out the personality of the candidate. So put your hiring hat on because I'm sure you've hired many over the years. How do you develop a culture in whether it's high trust or another organization that attracts women? And how might you adapt your interviewing style to attract great women to your organization?
So there is, for every position, there is certain, there's a job description. So there are certain criteria that have to be met. I think almost everyone interviews for that. But interviewing also includes selling, meaning
Yes.
that, the interviewee is interviewing the employer.
Yeah, just as much as the other way around. Yeah. So, Hemma, my next question for you is how do you develop a work culture that is attractive to women? I know in your leadership role, you are doing a lot of recruiting and looking for fresh talent, and women are always welcomed in the field. Do you change your interview style when you're looking for great women talent?
Yeah, so we do. And I think, as you know, when we're interviewing, there's usually a job description, and there's a clear sort of indication of the criteria that are
Hmm.
required for that job. And so most times we're interviewing the individual based on that job description, but recognizing that that person is actually interviewing the employer at the same time,
Yes.
makes the conversation, you're selling as much as you're sort of trying to figure out whether they are suitable. And so you really have to tease out the character. And so in terms of the culture part, you have to make sure that you talk through in sort of what kind of an environment are you providing. So for example, given that we're so digitally enabled these days, most of the folks at High Trust, as an example, can work from home. And that gives them the flexibility of being able to, take their children to the doctors, or,
Right.
even if they needed to, if they wanted to work out, they could work out during the day and, make up for those hours after in the evening. So there's not necessarily fixed hours that they have to be in the office. Now, that doesn't apply to all the functions, but in engineering, largely that would be applicable, where as long as you know, commit to the deliverables and deliver on time, when you work on those is not, you could be working midnight to 6 if necessary, right? It
Just
doesn't
get the
really.
job done. Right, right.
Exactly. That's sort of one part, which is the flexible hours. The second piece is recognizing as a team that you have members with maybe some hard stops. So, for example, if you have women that have younger children that need to be picked up from school or dropped off, we try to accommodate those and not schedule meetings or conference calls during those hours, but have sort of blocks of hours that everybody recognizes on the team are sort of the core hours when you need that overlap. So, again, it's sort of adjusting to people's life and requirements outside of work, and then making sure that what's necessary in order to succeed at work is also enabled, right? But there's clear guidance given in terms of maybe, between noon and 4, people should be at work so that there is overlap and whiteboarding and, in-person communication can take place, but everything else can be flexible.
You, you,
So,
and it sounds like you're nimble at High Trust, right? And you're willing to accommodate great talent, as you said, as long as they produce the deliverables.
and in the end, it's all about the outcomes, right? The
Yeah.
quality of the work and on-time delivery, and making sure that when sort of it's a very interconnected team, right? You are depending on each other to succeed. So when you commit to something and you deliver, the respect and the reputation you earn, it's like everybody just feels like, oh, I want to work with this person because I know that I'm going to get, when they say they will do something, I will get that, and I don't
Right.
have to look at it again. And then, obviously, you always have a mix. And then there'll
Hmm.
be folks that need more pushing or coaching or um, just, management oversight. And in those cases, the managers are, again, you have to customize your management style for each individual. Earlier, I had talked about, it's all about the individuals, right? Our success is dependent on everybody that we interact with and enable. And so, even in terms of management, individual managers have to customize their style for the people. And for women, especially, I think the customization goes to teasing out what they're not saying. So, and I think that, I've learned this from personally, which is, I will never make the case to, I expect that the rewards will be given to me. I don't demand my reward. And that's a stylistic difference from
Mm.
men. Men will walk in and say, "Where's my pay raise?
Yeah.
I just did XYZ, I should be rewarded." Whereas the women will say, "I've completed the job,
I've earned it. Right. Yeah.
success," and expect the reward to be given as opposed to them asking and then expecting it. So, and I think managers have to recognize that not everyone will have that same level of confidence, or just, again, confidence or arrogance, right? It's borderline, depending on the individual, to just ask or demand that they have earned a certain promotion or bonus or whatever it is, comp, increase. Whereas the women are less likely. So that would be something else that I would guide people on, which is, uh, as managers, to enable a culture where women are more comfortable, you have to tease out these answers, and also, coach them to say it's okay to ask.
Exactly. Yeah. Give them permission.
Mm.
So, Hemma, let's wrap up by talking about self awareness. And I think this is two-sided, right? As a candidate, as a colleague, as a professional, being self aware in the work environment, but also being savvy and aware of the business and the market. I see so many candidates who don't do their homework, and shame on them, not only about the company for which they are interviewing, but the industry at large. Any thoughts about that?
I think it's really important. I mean, now you don't have to be sort of culturally aware of every single thing, but you have to be, if you're in your chosen profession, you have to be comfortable knowing what's happening in the market at large. And so I subscribe to a number of electronic magazines, right?
Hmm.
Digital magazines, and I listen to podcasts and lots of, sort of, again, you have to do the homework to be aware. And obviously, time is critical. How much can you possibly? So, what I do is glance through. I read the headlines and then maybe the short paragraph underneath. And sometimes, if it's, I think, relevant or interesting or timely, I will go in and read the whole article. But it is important to have at least gone through at a cursory level and read some of that material. I mean, as an example, right, just personal journey, when I joined High Trust back in 2008, I actually did not know virtualization or cloud at all, right? I
Mm.
practically knew nothing about it. But I knew security, right? And now, fast forward, just last week, I was at the Cybersecurity Innovation Forum in Washington, D.C., and I was hosting a panel on cybersecurity and cloud and how to innovate at the pace, right, and adopt at which we're actually making sort of progress, right, especially in the cyberspace. And I was hosting a panel as a sort of innovator, as a startup from the Silicon Valley, and my panelists were a person from Department of Homeland Security, a person from the national, the National Cyber, sorry, the
That's okay.
National Institute of Standards and Technology, the NSA, and the White House.
So, an impressive lineup. Yeah.
Exactly, and so it goes back to, and I mentioned this earlier as well, which is women don't give themselves enough credibility, and just their ability to learn is huge. Their ability to multitask is huge. But I don't think they give themselves that sort of, yes, I can. Um, and so they always hold themselves back. I think they're, for women, for most women, probably their harshest critics is themselves, and their heart, their sort of strongest person that can actually hold them back is themselves. And so self-awareness comes from knowing yourself as well, right? What you're capable of. And, if you can learn, you can do almost anything. And
So true.
just knowing that, I think is should sort of kind of motivate you and drive you to want to do more. The second is you have to do your homework. So I was very fortunate to know a really amazing individual. He's still around, but I have less opportunities to work with him closely. And he was known as Dr. Secure at IBM. He's now at Microsoft. And I was so impressed because he was always on top of every technology. He knew the details and, really well informed. And I would ask, how do you do it? And his response was, if you snooze, you lose.
Yeah.
And it's so true. So how you actually stay current, like I've created my own little cheat sheet, so to speak, where I glance through, I make sure I have the content, I glance through it all, and then things that matter, I read more about. But you have to know the market, then you have to know your job, and you have to stay current. What are the new innovations? What is trending now? So that you feel that you haven't lost touch, right? That you're staying current as much as possible.
Emma, thank you so much for your wonderful wisdom and sharing your time and expertise on the show today. I wish you great success, and I hope that our professional paths cross again soon.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And I want to thank our listening audience for tuning in to Your Working Life, where my goal is to help you design your career destiny so it doesn't happen by default. True career and life satisfaction is possible, and it's time to embrace what you love doing so you can do more of it. I'm Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Take good care.